My name is Karen Daye. I have the pleasure of serving as the chair of Notre Dame Women Connect. I'm a graduate of the class of '85, former resident of Lewis and Farley. And tonight, on behalf of Notre Dame Women Connect, it is my deep pleasure to welcome you to Trading Stories, Shifting Careers, Changing Locations, and Evolving Life Chapters. I will just share that I am particularly excited about this because I have recently changed jobs and moved. And so I'm super excited to hear from our great panel tonight. Before we do that, very quickly, want to fill you in on Notre Dame Women Connect. If you're already familiar, tune out for a second, but if not, let me just remind everyone that Notre Dame Women Connect is a special segment of the alumni community that focuses on fostering ties among Notre Dame women around the nation and across the world. We do this really in three ways. First, in your local community. We welcome women in the communities they call home with events tailored to local alumni interests. I'm going to drop some links in the chat after I talk to you to help you find your local group and your local Women Connect activities. Second, we welcome women alumni at events on campus. First, we have an annual women's retreat that's coming up in June. We'd love for you to join us. And second, we have a reunion event where we center on issues that are of particular interest to our female alumni. And then third is an example of what we're doing tonight. We welcome Notre Dame women for virtual events you can access from anywhere. These include spotlighting inspiring women in the Notre Dame family, centering conversations about women's leadership, and as we're doing tonight, talking about the unique challenges women face in professional life and sharing those workplace stories. I want to encourage everyone to explore our website. I'll drop that link in the chat, and want to just mention one other thing before we get to our program. 2022 is a really exciting year. It is the time when we mark 50 years since the first undergraduate women were admitted to Notre Dame. There's so much to celebrate, and we hope that you'll follow the other link I'm going to put in the chat to find out more about the golden anniversary and how you can join in. So we are so glad you came. We hope you enjoy this Notre Dame Women Connect. We hope it's not your last one. We hope maybe it's not even your first one. And now I'll send it over to Sharon Kane from the Alumni Association, who will share some details.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks so much, Karen. I'm really delighted to be with you and share in the evening and hear the stories and the learnings and the camaraderie. I work in the Alumni Association. I'm a grad myself from '84 and oversee our career and professional pursuits. That is, how do we support our alumni and alumni over the course of their career? So I just want to make sure people are aware of what we have to offer. Irish Compass is the official community for working professionals, alumni, and students. And it's where we go to activate the network, this network we have. And you can find trusted advisors and mentors, make career connections, whatever organization, profession, industry sector. We have 30,000 members on Irish Compass right now. So I encourage everyone to join Irish Compass at irishcompass.nd.edu and be active on there. And if you have any questions, let us know. Our Irish Compass program manager, a shout out to Juliana Newbill, who's an '02 grad and leads the charge there. In addition to having this professional community that you can tap and activate, we have a career coaching team. I do hear from people that they're surprised by that. So we have 13 career coaches organized by career stage, from career launch through executive and encore, who are all Notre Dame grads. They're professional coaches. They're certified. They're very talented and skilled. And you can find them on my.nd.edu under Connect, or just email me. I'll put it in the chat. Thirdly, we have a slate of online resources, think checklists and videos and articles and things that help you jumpstart, get ideas, things that are going to give you the competitive advantage when it comes to your resume or interviewing or your LinkedIn profile. And lastly, I wanted to mention that we partner with our affinity groups like ND Women Connect and Young Alumni and other affinity groups, along with clubs, and we do a fair amount of programming there. So just giving a shout out and making sure that our proud and wonderful and gifted alumni know that the Alumni Association is here to support you over the course of your career. And now I'll hand it to Maureen and Sheila.
Thanks so much, Sharon. Sheila, do you want to go ahead?
Sure. Thank you, Sharon, and thank you, Karen. And thank you all for joining us tonight for the panel discussion. I do want to thank the panelists for their participation, time, and openness in sharing their career journey with all of us. Thank you to the registrants for attending the call and your suggested questions. We plan to have another panel discussion later this year, and we'd love to hear more feedback after our discussion tonight. So I'll start by introducing myself. I'm Sheila Delaney, the Regional Director for Illinois Notre Dame Women Connect. And I studied architecture undergrad, graduated in '99, and I lived in Baden Hall. I transitioned from a 12-year career in architecture to getting an MBA in '09 from Notre Dame. And I've been working in real estate investments since then, currently working at JP Morgan and the LITech real estate investment team. So Maureen, over to you.
Thanks so much, Sheila. Hi, I'm Maureen Matthias. I'm class of '93. I have a BA in economics. I lived in Knott Hall. I'm currently the ND Women Connect Regional Director for the East Region, and that stretches from Connecticut all the way down to Delaware, and that includes like New York City and Philadelphia. My career journey started after Notre Dame at Arthur Andersen doing transfer pricing consulting. And then when I had my children, I became a stay-at-home mom and at the same time started volunteering, which I still do today. So now I'd like to open up our conversation to our panelists. We have our three panelists, Betsy, Lazzara, and McCaw, class of '98, Mo Ertel, class of '06, and Nia Daye, class of '13. So we'd like to start with Betsy, and each of the panelists will share a little bit of their career journey and introduce themselves to us. Betsy?
Great, thanks, Maureen. I am really excited to be here. I will say I've done a couple of these over the pandemic, and this is by far and away the most organized that I have been a part of. So now I've got to watch my time and make sure I keep my part. As Maureen mentioned, I'm 98 BP grad, finance. I have 3 children. I have a 5-year-old boy, a 7-year-old girl, and a 13-year-old stepdaughter. So we are in the thick of life at home. Career-wise, I started out after Notre Dame. I went off to San Francisco to do real estate investment banking. I did not actually want to be in real estate. I wasn't really sure that I wanted to be in investment banking, but the people that interviewed me were the smartest people that interviewed me, and I thought I'd take a job with them and learn how to be a professional from them. So I took myself out to the West Coast, didn't know anyone, stayed for 2 years, which was my plan, quit and went to South Africa to volunteer for a summer, actually through a Notre Dame MBA program, even though I wasn't an MBA, just called the professors and said I'd pay my way. And then I found my way back to Chicago. I'm a Midwestern girl, grew up here in Indianapolis, which I am now, and did private equity and venture capital for Robert W. Baird and Company, so Milwaukee-based investment bank. And I was in 2 separate funds. I was on the early stage VC side and the late stage PE side at the same time. And that was really one of those up and out, they grind you through and they say, go back off to school. And so that's what I did. I was there for 3 years and I went back to school to get my MBA down at Duke in '03 to '05. And when I was there, one of my reasons was I wanted to actually get out of PE and VC. I did not love the financial engineering. What I really loved was the strategy of the companies. But here I was, 25, advising companies on CEOs what they should do with themselves. And I'd never been in a company as an executive making a decision. So I felt like I had to learn that first. So I bounced out of my MBA and took a job at Brunswick, which now is a very different looking company, but at the time was Fortune 500, bowling, billiards, life fitness, exercise equipment, and a massive marine portfolio, which is what it is now. So that's Mercury Marine Engines and 20 some odd boat brands around the world. And I went into a leadership development program that was intended to rotate us around. So I did that and went straight into corporate strategy at corporate. I did that, started a small service business for our dealers around North America and all of our marine businesses. And then I ended up running several different functions for the Bayliner boat brand, which is sold in 80 countries around the world in the Great Recession. So that was a wonderful time to be in boating. Learned a lot from bankruptcy of dealers to turnaround, managing for cash. And then I quit. I wanted to learn from growth. I wanted to learn from a different kind of situation. I actually took a year off in, I think it was 11, which was fabulous. And then I wanted to get into ed reform or be an entrepreneur. So I did ed reform on the for-profit and nonprofit side. And then I got married, had a stepdaughter, and said I need to be home instead of traveling. And I took a role for a nonprofit here based in Indiana. I had bounced all over the country until then. When I got married at a nonprofit focused on the long-term economic development of the state of Indiana. And so I did that for 5 years, helped start an innovation district, helped think about things for the government around STEM education and a variety of other things around growing business and the economy in Indiana. And then 3 years ago, found myself thinking, all right, what's next? And ended up at now a 91-year-old private company. I'm effectively the CHRO. I'm the Executive Vice President of People and Culture, having never been in HR before, but my role here is really as a change agent as we transform how we really think about talent and the growth of our people from a very siloed organization to one that is finding its way through what is next from a siloed decentralization and something in between. So all that while having some kids, raising a family, and moving around. So lots in there. Look forward to chatting with all of you.
Thanks so much, Betsy. Mo, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your career journey?
Yeah, sure thing. First of all, it's a pleasure to be here. It was an honor to be invited. I have never spoken on a panel before, so appreciate everybody bearing with me as I tell this story. I am a 2006 Notre Dame graduate. I studied English and gender studies, lived in BP for a couple of years before moving off campus. And I would say my major activity while I was at Notre Dame, aside from studying, was working on Scholastic Magazine. Started as a copy editor there, low level, somebody talked me into it, and then eventually worked my way up to being co-editor-in-chief my senior year. Fit very nicely with my English major and my sort of perfectionistic mindsets. And that really set the path for my early career. What I wanted to do when I graduated from college was to join the magazine industry, but it just so happened at that time that the magazine industry was going through a digital transformation and a lot of magazines were folding and busting. So I actually had to pivot my career plans very early onto my career. And instead of going into magazines, I ended up going into book publishing and got a job at a major nonfiction publishing house focused on business, finance, and investing books. Had no background in that whatsoever, but it was really fortuitous timing because about a year and a half into my tenure, the financial crash of 2008 happened. And I learned more about finance and investing and bad practices than I ever could have imagined. And I worked in the publishing industry for about 7 years. At a certain juncture, I decided that it just wasn't squaring with my moral compass very well. I felt like the publishing house that I was working for wasn't being particularly above board with its authors. And at that point, I took a step back and looked at my career more broadly and what I was really passionate about. I couldn't help thinking back to my desire to go into magazine and understanding that that came from a deeply embedded love of design. Design is pretty important in my family. My sister is an urban planner. She's on this call right now. Hey, Val. My uncle is an architect. So it's just really been a part of my upbringing and my looking at role models. So when I decided I wanted to get into the design industry, I had a particular love and appreciation of furniture design, which is a very specific nerdy thing to like. But I knew at the time when I was transitioning out of publishing that it was too far of a jump to go from a nonfiction business and finance book editor to the design world. So I took a stepping stone and joined American Express after taking a deep inventory of what I had actually learned in the publishing industry, which was management of author needs and publishing house needs. So I ended up parlaying that into a role in client management. Essentially same function, different parties involved, managing client needs at the same time that I was managing American Express's needs. It was a very happy accident that I landed on the team that I did, and with the portfolio of small business merchants that I was looking after at the time in New York City, my merchant portfolio was really heavily weighted on design companies, which couldn't have anticipated that. Very happy accident. So I got to work hand in hand with these amazing furniture brands and see what their business operations look like and see what their constraints were and their priorities were. And that really made me, it kept me in place for a little bit because I was able to pursue what I was passionate about in a tangential way. And then in 2015, my dad suddenly died of a heart attack. And I took, again, second point, a couple steps back and tried to think, if I lived my whole life in this place right now, doing the same thing, is this something I'm passionate about? Do I care about credit cards? Should I keep doing this? And the answer was no. I did not care about credit cards. I cared about the design merchants that I was looking after. So at that point, I really heavily started applying for any client management job that came up in any capacity on LinkedIn, on Indeed, anything I could do. I ended up getting interviewed and landing a job at Vitra, which is a Swiss-German furniture manufacturer. They are essentially the Herman Millers of Europe, and worked there for about 3.5 years before I met my wife, who grew up in Los Angeles, and decided, hey, I've lived in New York for about 10 years. I would like to try LA for a little bit. Talked Vitra into transferring me over to LA. And when I was transferred over, I took on management of Vitra's full independent sales staff. And then just about 6 months ago, I left Vitra for a new furniture manufacturer. It's called Hem Design Studio. It's based out of Stockholm. And there I am managing the independent sales staff, but also the internal sales employees in New York and in Los Angeles. And that brings me to today.
Thank you, Mo. How about from you, Nia? Can you tell us your story?
Sure. And just like Mo said, thank you all for having me here. I'm really excited and so great to see so many people on the call also. So I'm Nia Daye. I'm a Notre Dame class of 2013. I lived in PE, Pascarella East for a couple of years and then moved off campus for my rest of the time at Notre Dame. I was a marketing major, so in Mendoza. And I guess my career journey definitely is still continuing, but it started after graduation. I guess kind of not typical of a Notre Dame grad. I left without a job. I had offers, but I really was interested in working in sports. Also, I forgot to mention, I live in Philadelphia. So if you hear a lot of background noise, it's because I live on a major street. So apologies in advance. But I left Notre Dame without having a full-time role yet. I was really interested into sports. I've always had a love for sports, and I had a lot of friends that were athletes growing up. And so my dream was always to be like their agent or like help them and their families, especially in transition, and knowing like best practices when it comes to like financial management or like what to do so you're not like then left with nothing after this great career. So in talking and connecting with a Notre Dame grad who worked for the NBA, I met him my junior year and he gave the advice that it's really time sensitive. So like, you're better off, like, just wait, it'll eventually work out. So I left, went back home. I grew up in Bayonne, New Jersey. So right outside New York City, went back home. I started and got a part-time position with Legends Hospitality at Yankee Stadium. So that was a really cool experience. I was actually working, it was called a customer specialist role, but I was in charge of getting information about really participants' experiences. So like going in the suites or to different parts of the stadiums to survey those who were attending the games, to ask them like, how's your experience been? Like when you're at ordering food, or if you are, in the suite, if you're interacting with ticket takers, like how's the entire experience for you? I got to secret shop, so I was also evaluating employees. So that was kind of a interesting experience, and was continuing to apply for full-time roles in sports. And luckily I applied for a job with the Sixers. So this was the very beginning of the process. If anyone's familiar with the Sixers' current changes, I applied for a role. They were in this change mode. Luckily, I think a couple days after applying, they called me down for an interview. And that same day, they offered me a position in their inside sales team. So that's what brought me to Philadelphia. I did my first season there, which was really exciting. Again, it was like the AI retirement ceremony, like everything felt great. It was a great experience. But I just realized in that first season that the day-to-day work, the calling and stuff wasn't really a fit for me, though I loved interacting with my clients, whether they be season ticket holders or game packages or groups. I just didn't enjoy the day-to-day. So I ended up leaving that role without having another role in play, which I wouldn't do moving forward. So, but I just felt like it didn't feel right to continue to do the work when I wasn't enjoying it. And so I decided to take that leap of faith and leave. Luckily, within a month, I found a new position with Drexel University Online. So Drexel University here in Philadelphia had an online university, and they had a business development department that worked closely with their corporate and healthcare partners that they had across the country. So in my role, I was kind of like a partnership liaison, and I really enjoyed that. I got to travel. I did conferences. I learned a lot about different industries, from healthcare and learning about RN to BSN and MSN and all of those different things, medical billing and coding. Again, going to conferences in LA or San Diego or Disney World to help in connecting, but also building custom partnership plans and initiatives that really fit the goals of the executives in each of those organizations. So I was really able to sit down and speak with, the head of, the HR departments to see like, what are the goals that you have education-wise for your employees, and how can we help and assist in that? So I was doing that work, and unfortunately, I was laid off. The university was having major layoffs at the time. So I was laid off from that position. And in my scramble, I was like, okay, that was a very unexpected career transition for me, and trying to figure out, okay, what's next? And so I scrambled and luckily found again another role, which was in IT recruiting and staffing. I never really had experience with it, but I liked the idea of helping people get a job. So I was like, oh, that's great. I'll be able to help people find a career that they like. And so I started that role. I worked for Randstad Technologies. So started in, I think that was August of 2017. In 6 months in, I already realized that also was not a fit, but I didn't want to make another jump and another career transition without really taking the time to think through, like, what is it that I want and what do I enjoy? And so I ended up staying in that role for about 2 years. Again, trying to figure out what is it that I really want, what am I passionate about, and what is gonna like make me feel comfortable and happy to get up each day. And during that time, between conversations with my parents, friends, but then also people that I was meeting through volunteer experiences, specifically Notre Dame grads, actually, they kind of helped in mentoring me through the process of, okay, well, you've been volunteering a lot. I've always have volunteered with nonprofits, really since especially high school and moving forward, and taking a look to see, okay, well, you have such a great passion about that. Why not just make that your career? So I started to explore the idea of working either in higher ed or a nonprofit, whether that be a larger nonprofit or a more local organization. And I actually was introduced to a local nonprofit. I was volunteering with them for about a year, a Notre Dame grad here in the Philly area. He was a board member and kind of mentioned them when Voices, which is the gospel choir from Notre Dame, was coming to visit Philadelphia. So I kind of got connected to Mercy Neighborhood Ministries through him and started volunteering and started a program with their middle school students on a volunteer basis. But through that volunteering, they knew I was looking for a change in career. And they just happened at the same time to be looking to bring someone on in their development department. They wanted to bring on a new assistant director. And so luckily in my applying, I was getting a little, defeated with the application process. It just so happened that towards the end of me saying, maybe I should take a break and reassess, they actually said, hey, we have this position open. Would you like to apply? So I applied and interviewed, and luckily they brought me on. And so I've been now assistant director of philanthropy for Mercy for 4 years now. In that role, between myself and my director, we really split all the responsibilities of the development department. So I get to do everything from grant writing, creating the strategy and initiatives, whether it be marketing, our fundraising strategy, individual giving, event planning and coordinating. And this might probably seem like a lot to a lot of people, but I actually enjoy having my hand in a lot of different things. And I've learned so much through this process and then being in this role and getting that exposure both to the strategy side of it, but also the networking, the working, and now I'm at a point of figuring out what's next. So that's a little bit about me, and I'm looking forward to the conversation again with Mo and Betsy.
Great, thank you so much, Nia.
Yeah. So if it's all right, we're going to just head over into our questions. We've got our first question is for Betsy. At the start of your career, did you know that this would be your career path? What informed you along the way, the roles you were moving into, and what were the right roles for you? Like, how did you come to those decisions?
So I can say definitively, I did not start out my career thinking that I would be running talent and HR at a large family company, nor did I actually think I'd be back in Indianapolis. But starting out in finance and in the slightly more hardcore part of finance, one of them, this was not anticipated. However, I really thought from the beginning, it was, what can I learn? Do I like the people I'm going to learn from? Do I feel like I have something that I can learn from them, which is kind of an arrogant way to look at it. So I should be a lot more humble about that. But I really wanted to work for smart people. And that varied in terms of what I would learn, from being a professional in the early days to I work for a CEO right now who's a woman CEO. And one of the reasons why I wanted to come work for her was because she leads with an extraordinary amount of EQ. And I had not seen that in a leader of an organization before at this level. And I thought, well, this seems a little bit more authentic to how I want to lead, but I'm not really sure how to do that. And I want to see it in practice. So what I wanted to learn varied at different career points and changes for me. And I took chances along the way. I quit jobs without having other jobs, which you heard from others on this panel. With a little bit of confidence. My grandfather in 2000 was like, what in the heck are you doing? How can you quit your job and go to South Africa? You have to make money. You have to have a job. And, he was of the greatest generation. So we can understand and appreciate that. And then I did it again 10 years later. So by that point, he was slightly better with it. But it really had to do with what can I learn? Who am I going to learn from? And what's the impact I'm going to make? Or do I have a lifestyle that allows me to make an impact either at work, if I'm going to work my butt off, or outside of work, if I need the balance there? And then lifestyle played into things very clearly later as I got married and had a stepdaughter and didn't feel like I should be traveling every week when we only had her a certain portion of the week. So different things impacted what organization to choose, but what the impact was going to be, who I could learn from, and how that was just going to keep me intellectually challenged were always top of mind for me. And as I got older in my career, more experienced in my career, it had a lot to do with the culture that I was walking into. I had a lot more questions about that in the last decade than I did the first 15, 20 years.
Thank you.
Thanks, Betsy. Our next question is from Mo. Mo, what were the critical points in your career that helped you navigate your next steps? For example, you transitioned from publishing to financial services to the design industry. What enabled you to take a chance on something when your mind might have said differently?
Oh man, I mean, honestly, it starts from a baseline, to be totally honest, baseline level of privilege that I feel very fortunate to have, to be able to take certain risks. I have a supportive family who I haven't had to rely on too much, but they, in the back of my mind, were always a backstop for me in case something ever went really awry. I would say that my family, and particularly my dad, who is also a Notre Dame graduate, was a lawyer, wanted to be a civil rights attorney, ended up in copyright law, but he instilled in me and my sisters very strong sense of right and wrong. And it was almost like my mind wasn't saying anything differently, especially when I was working at the first major publishing house that I was working at. When I started as an editorial assistant and then worked my way up to project editor, assistant editor, associate editor, acquisitions editor, full level. And as I got deeper and deeper embedded into the process and was sort of this instrument of the publishing industry, and really was living this experience of mostly targeting first-time authors, having a very blanket publishing agreement that had very little room for any changes to it, and then seeing functionally what would happen to the authors if they disagreed with their cover art or with the way that their book was edited, and then having no legal recourse. It was just like, I can't be a participant in this system. I left that company for a different publishing company. It was very much the same thing all over again. And it didn't hurt also that in the back of my mind, I knew I had these other passions, and that I, eventually wanted to pursue them. I didn't really have a strong timeline for that until my dad passed away. So it's like my dad features very heavily in a lot of this, but he was a very strong influence on me, and just these moments of reflection and checking in with myself and saying, hey, are you doing something that you're comfortable with? Hey, does this represent who you feel like you are inside? Does this match like what you want to be doing with your life? Like, how are you going to be spending 80% of your time every week doing this thing? It's like, when the answer was consistently no, the decision to make a change was relatively easy at that point. It was the making the change itself that was a little bit more challenging. It was also thinking outside of the box and, recognizing that I had learned a lot while I was in the publishing industry, and not just the typical things that you expect to learn, like how to negotiate an author contract or line edit a book. Like, there's a lot more that went into it than that. So I think it was also having an openness as to what I was actually doing and what skills I had acquired. And it was also rethinking the skills that would be required in the industry that I wanted to work in. Because before I made the change, a common refrain that I would tell myself is, you're not particularly creative. You're a little bit too much of a perfectionist to work in a creative industry. And when I was able to shift myself out of that mindset and understand that there are other areas of expertise that I have and other skills that I have that a design company could use just as much as a publishing house could use, that really opened up the door for me and gave me the confidence that I needed to make the jump and just remain open to learning, and to trust myself that I could learn whatever it was that any new industry or experience would throw my way.
Thanks so much, Mo.
Thank you, Mel. Nia, oftentimes individuals will define boredom or a lack of learning as an indicator for a time to change or transition with work. Other times the role just doesn't turn out the way they hope. So when did you know that it was time to move on and your changes in your career?
Yeah, I think it was definitely a combination of those depending on the role. So I think what was most pressing was just not feeling a lot of the roles at those times were a fit. So except for Drexel, that kind of was out of my control. That kind of, you know. But the other roles, it was feeling one, kind of what Mo was just saying about kind of feeling if I was fulfilling a little bit of a purpose, or like, did it feel like meaningful work to me? And if I was being challenged. So some of the roles did feel at times like I was kind of just doing the same thing over and over again. I didn't feel like I was putting certain skill sets to work. And I wanted more of a challenge, something that was different each day, but there was still consistency, but I didn't feel like I was really utilizing the best of my abilities. And then again, sometimes I could do something really well, but it just didn't feel, I guess, very fulfilling or meaningful to me. And so at those times I had to, again, kind of like step back. Something, again, my parents, I know Mo mentioned like her dad, but my parents were always saying like, you just need to make sure you're finding what really feels meaningful and purposeful to you in work, and you can do well in it. You'll be able to succeed in it. It's just finding what really feels fulfilling to you and you feel like you're doing meaningful work, because they know that that's very important to me. So yeah, I guess in an odd way, it was easier in the beginning to make those switches because it did feel like, oh, this just isn't working. So let's figure out what's next. Whereas I think probably now I am in a role that does feel meaningful and comfortable, and I'm still learning, but I've learned a lot in these last few years. And so now I think the question has kind of changed of like, it's still what's next, but it isn't the same thing of being bored anymore. It's just what is next for me and what would, I guess, still provide more of that meaningful work for me, but in a different way. So the question has kind of like changed a little bit for me.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nia. My next question is for Betsy. Betsy, you went back to school to further your education, receiving an MBA from Duke. How does one know the right time to pursue a step like this? And what questions does one ask oneself? And I'm going to weave in a question from our chat right now. Basically, like how do you add in the financial decision into these type of decisions as well?
So I'll start with the financial and then I'll get to the MBA real quick. So when I left my first job, I was 2 years out of school. I had been in San Francisco, as many of you know, one of the most expensive cities in the country, during the internet boom when it was really expensive relative to many others. And I walked in with a tiny bit of debt. I was lucky. I was very lucky because my parents had paid for my college. But they were, you know, I was okay, you're out. If you come back, you're paying rent. So at that point, I had saved just enough to pay my way over the summer, but I didn't have a lot of runway once I got back from my summer in South Africa. So I did need a job relatively soon or I'd be paying rent. And then 3 years later, so that's when I moved back to Chicago. I didn't really have a whole lot of belongings at that point. It was all in storage in San Francisco. But part of that was, to be honest, I was young. I had confidence that I'd find a job. It was the year 2000, so it was pretty easy at that point to find a job. And I had a skill set that I thought people wanted. So I think there was I could start. I was going to be low level where I was going to be, and that was going to be fine. I'd work my way. When I chose to go back to school, I did that because I knew I was going to shift careers and because that was going to give me a jumping off point. I was going to broaden my network. I knew I could take loans out that were going to be really favorable at the time. So I would imagine like it is now, but I'm not entirely sure. But my loans were really cheap, and I've actually held on to them because they've been cheap. So in that case, I took, and then I knew I could find an internship over the summer, but I did need a paying internship because that was going to be important. When I quit in 2011, and wasn't sure what was next, I knew I was going to take a year off. I read the first 2 chapters of the 4-Hour Workweek. And in like the first 3 or 4 pages, it said, what's the worst it could get? And I thought, okay, I know I was unhappy. I wanted to, the culture was negative because we just kept having to say no to stuff through the Great Recession, and we were coming out of it. And I really wanted to be able to say yes. I wanted to reward my people. I wanted to invest in product. I wanted to invest in a number of things, but we just, as a company, weren't ready. So I wanted to learn from something different. I was just unhappy, working a ton, not getting to invest in my community, not getting to make many friends. I was in a new spot at that point. I was down in Knoxville. And so when I read that and it said, okay, what's the worst it could get? And I thought, well, I could be eating ramen noodles on a couch of a friend or a family member, and I can handle that for a while if that's what it gets to. And I was lucky. I had saved enough that I knew I could last a while without working, but I thought, you know what, if this lasts longer than I expect because the economy shifts again, then I can eat ramen noodles on someone's couch for a little while. And I'm grateful for the friends from Notre Dame. I'm grateful for my family that they'd let me hang out on a couch if I needed to. And if not, I had just enough to, for a while, to manage through renting someplace. So I just took a leap in those cases. But in the last one, I was lucky because I was much more secure in being able to do that.
It was a great answer. Thank you so much, Betsy.
Thanks, Betsy. Mo, when you left the company, you mentioned because it was not in alignment with your moral compass or your internal ethics. Can you share with us the discernment process you had from the discovery of that into moving on?
Definitely. It's interesting. I've been thinking about that whole transition. I don't think it's the only time I've done that in my career, where I've decided that the operations of a company are just not in alignment with my moral compass. And it was really like living in the day-to-day with the requirements that I had in the role, and waking up and realizing that the part of my day that I was least looking forward to was always the enforcement of the publishing contract. I also it's my personality, was back then, still is, to get very close and build very strong one-on-one relationships with people. And these are the types of relationships I had with my authors. So when they would be presented with their cover art and say they had a choice between 3 covers, none of which represented their vision, and they struggled with it and they fought against it, and I could not do anything to help them, that was really troubling to me. It was troubling. I actually completely rewrote a book on my publishing company's behalf that we then published under the author's name. Just some really, it was like what I was saying in the previous question. I just felt like an instrument of this force that I didn't want to be used in that way, because it just did not align with everything I knew to be, night and day, right and wrong. So it was just, it sounds a little too simplistic to say it was a gut feeling, but it was, am I happy doing this? Do I feel good about the things that I'm doing? I do not. I can't, I would rather be uncomfortable and not really know what my next move is than to continue sitting in this discomfort of this day in, day out, just compromised moral compass. And I did that in my current industry too. I worked for a company that was not valuing the team that I managed. I realized I didn't really explain what independent sales reps are. They're basically, this happens with a lot of different furniture manufacturers, is that there are sales reps across the continent who run their own businesses, and they represent, like, let's say 4 to 5 different manufacturers, whether that's like acoustical wall tiles or like glass walls or furniture companies or whatever the case may be. And it's in my old company that I was with, there was a new leader that took over while I was there, and she completely devalued my team, devalued what they were bringing into the company, even though we were 60% of the company's overall revenue. And I'm probably a little too stubborn for my own good sometimes in these situations, because if I can't defend what my company is doing and I am supposed to be an instrument of that, then I just feel like I have to move on. And I have been fortunate, just going to the financial aspect, I have almost not left a job without having another job lined up for the duration of my career. That was something that my mom instilled in me really strongly. So in that sense, I have sat in that discomfort for, a couple of months, 2, 4, 6 months at a time, knowing that this discomfort of my day-to-day moral compass being compromised is what is really pushing me forward to apply for jobs every night and to interview for companies that I'm not really sure about. So if that answers the question.
Yes, thank you so much, Mo.
Thanks so much, Mo.
Welcome.
Nia, I have a question for you. Can you tell us, how did you find the different new roles you moved into? And a little bit about your networking, and then also about the power of the Notre Dame network in your life and the different jobs that you transitioned into.
Yeah. I think networking is really important. I think people have sometimes a negative feel about it, but I've always just taken it as I'm just meeting people. So I just like talking to people, and then you make a connection, and then sometimes that connection can lead to other opportunities. So connections or networking, but especially the Notre Dame network has been really key. Like I said, my current job, an ND alum sits on our board for our nonprofit, and he's the one that obviously introduced me to it more in a volunteer capacity, which obviously eventually led to this, but also an ND alum at the job I was at before this at Randstad. He also sat down with me one time. He was the head of a different division, but he happened to sit in the suite of our division. So I would see him pretty frequently. And so we would like chat or like get lunch. And so one day he kind of just pulled me in the office. We were like we normally do, just to chat and see how I'm doing. And then he just looked at me like, I don't think this is a fit for you. And I was like, no. And I did kind of already know that, but I was kind of still working through like what would the next thing be for me. And he was like, it just doesn't seem like you're happy here. So like, maybe let's see if we can figure out what would be next for you. And so between him, again, my parents, and then Mercy itself kind of offering that opportunity, that was really key for me to have that mentorship of someone willing to sit down with me and being like, it's okay. Even if I like work as a boss here, I'm more invested in like your career and what's best for you. So especially in this transition, that was really key. But even starting my career, again, like before I got to the Sixers, I met an ND alum named Ted Lorkey. He used to work he still works for the NBA. And so I met him my junior year at Notre Dame and met him at, I think, a marketing club event, and just always stayed connected with him. Like when I would go home to the New York area, I would go into the city and like meet up with him just to get advice from him, because I knew it was something that I was interested in getting into, was the area of sports. And so he was such a great mentor through that process. He was the one that said like, it's okay to take the chance of like leaving without a job. He's like, it's very time sensitive. So like, you couldn't take a job in January because that job won't be there for you. Like you have to be able to start in like a week kind of thing. And actually, when I went to interview for the Sixers, one of his friends from the league office was one of the people that interviewed me. So I ended up kind of building that connection with that rep from the NBA league office, and like saw him the next day after being hired, and he was like, oh, I talked to Ted and he just raved about you. And again, even after getting that job with the Sixers, I kind of just maintained that relationship, because I think it's like key to, of course, to have the network and the connection, but it should be really a relationship. And I think sometimes too with mentorship, sometimes we might think it's more one-sided when really it has to be a two-way street. And so I felt it was good to like just continue that connection just in general, because we did have a lot in common to just talk about. And it really, again, I valued him helping me through that process. So again, connections are, I think, extremely important. And I hope people take it to, again, it's just relationships. It can seem daunting, I think, sometimes the networking aspect, but it's really just learning, connecting, and building a relationship with someone.
Thank you, Nia. So we are gonna go to our next round of questions, but I just wanted to mention we're running a little over on time. So we're gonna use our questions, but we may add an additional, like provide some tips within the question to our panelists. And then we may go a little bit over, maybe 5 minutes over our time. So I just wanted to make sure we're all aware of that, because we want to make sure we have time to get through the rest of these. And I feel like these are really there's a lot of good information in this conversation. So without further ado, Betsy, what was your biggest challenge with being a full-time executive, mother, wife, etc.? And then if you could also provide us with your like #1 tip for all on the call, like if there's a go-to quick tip for transitions and networking.
Sure. So honestly, I'd probably say mental health right now. It just depends on the period of my life, but I had my last kid when I was 40, so I'm 45 now. I came into a marriage with a 4-year-old at the time, and an ex-wife situation of my husband's that is like having another child and is an extraordinarily difficult thing to manage for all of us. So that has played a huge part in my life for the last 10 years. I also had an ectopic pregnancy, so I almost lost my life when I tried to have kids the first time, right after I got married. And that was right as I was supposed to start my job at the Central Indiana Corporate Partnership. So my second or third conversation with my boss was, hey, I just almost lost my life and half my blood, so and a pregnancy, so I hope I can. He goes, oh, well, you can start late. And I was like, no, I won't need to start late. I wanted to be super strong. And no, I called him back a couple of days later. I was like, yeah, I'm going to need a little bit more time. And then I had my daughter, and the year I had my daughter, I was working an enormous amount under a lot of pressure, trying to get through something through the city council here in Indianapolis. And I had a miscarriage. I had 2 miscarriages during that process, actually, between my 2 children. So during that period of time, lots of tons of work, having a newborn, trying to have another kid, and dealing with a stepdaughter who's wonderful, but the other half of that equation isn't, creates a lot of balance challenges in my life. And then I chose to come and do this job after having taken myself off like a Fortune 500 career executive path 10 years ago. I kind of put myself back in it, but on the private side this time. So now it's just a matter of trying to prioritize my time and make sure I'm giving my kids a chance to grow up in a happy and healthy family, which I would say I'm generally feel like I'm failing on most things on most days. But if I come out on a good day, and my daughter was super excited this morning and had a smile, happy day. And my son was at Ninja Zone this afternoon, running around like a crazy man and having fun. So I would say that it's a day-by-day challenge. But I think I attempt to do my best. I think my husband probably gets the short shift on this one. And so that's another part of the balance, because every one of these relationships is so important in the process. So my tip, gosh, I think that I would just say, figure out what's going to matter most to you in your life, and find the way to arrange your life, whether that's your career or your personal life, to have some fun. Whether it's to give back, whether it's whatever your thing is, that you have the opportunity to do that, because you want to be happy, and we're only here for a short time.
Thank you, Betsy.
Okay, thanks, Betsy. Mo, the next question is for you. This appears as the magic bullet question, but we all want to know, what strategies did you use? Those that worked, those that you might abandon, and those that got you where you are today. I think that ties in nicely with offering a tip. So what strategy would you actually say is your top tip, kind of briefly?
Oh man, one top tip. I would say the biggest thing that helped me throughout the entire process, from publishing to American Express to the design industry, was knowing what my end goal was, and understanding that it might not be the most direct path of just transitioning directly from publishing into design, but willing to take a step or two in between, knowing that eventually I would get to my goal if I was patient and persistent about it. I will also say, in general, I put together a transferable skills resume instead of a traditional resume. And I really targeted American Express as a company to work for. I knew that it would be a household name, that anywhere else that I would apply for, they would know who American Express was, know it was a big business. I also targeted them because I knew that their starting salary was something that was substantially better than what I was dealing with in publishing, which would then also establish a baseline salary for me for subsequent steps that I would take, and sort of establish this level of seniority that I might not otherwise have at the level that I was at. And also it is having confidence in yourself that you will get there, even if it takes you some time. If you are passionate enough about it, you will probably run into happy accidents like I did, or your persistence will just really push you through to the end. I truly believe that.
Love it. Thank you, Mel. Nia, did you ever envision what you were doing now when you were at Notre Dame? What was your vision for your career? And what do you think you'll be doing in the next 5 to 10 years? And what are you doing to position yourself for that in this time frame?
Yeah, so no, I did not think I would be necessarily in fundraising. Oddly enough, my undergrad job, though, at Notre Dame was in the phone center and helping with different advancement initiatives at the university. So everything kind of prepares you for whatever is coming next, is kind of what I think at this point. But no, I envisioned, again, of maybe, again, working in sports, eventually moving up in an executive role, or really working one-on-one with athletes in terms of helping them do more like life planning and preparing themselves for things like afterwards, financial assistance, or like just making sure that they were set up to succeed in those ways. So I didn't, but I am happy where I am. And I'm happy that I kind of took those leaps of faith and kind of listened to myself when it was like, this is not a fit, so what's next? And being willing to make those changes. And that's something I would tell others too. It can be scary. But if you have that gut feeling and you know that the work is not feeling meaningful or purposeful to you, or you're not enjoying it and it's hard for you to get up every day, that's time to definitely make the change, but also seeing if you can notice that before you get to the point that it's like, I can't be here anymore either. But in the next 5 to 10 years, I'm really open to that. I'm really starting to think of that. What's next? I've been involved in a women's giving circle that now has showed me the other side of the philanthropic world. And so looking at, do I want to stay in the nonprofit side, on the grassroots side of working on the programs or fundraising, or do I want to make the shift over to, you know, being more on the grant making side and having more decisions on how the money is distributed and trying to help shift those structures and systems that can be more beneficial to nonprofits like ones that I work for. So that, and also looking at roles that, again, have probably a more higher level and deals more with the strategy versus maybe the sales and fundraising aspect. So I'm starting to definitely do those things and having those conversations with, again, networking, talking with different alums, again, people I've met here in Philadelphia in the nonprofit and grant making worlds, and just trying to be open to, if an opportunity comes, you know, just kind of going with it. And that is, again, something that I'm reminding myself, is to be open and being willing to take those leap of faith when it comes to you. So I'm excited to see what happens, and I guess I'll keep you guys posted too, because I'm not sure, but that's also exciting to me. So I'm excited to see what happens.
Thank you, Nia. So Maureen, do we have any other speakers tonight, or are we?
Yes, first of all, I want to say thank you so much to Betsy and Mo and Nia for your generosity of spirit, and for sharing your wisdom with us tonight. I think we learned so much from your stories and your tips. It was really invaluable. Thank you.
I second that. Thank you.
And I also would like to introduce Dolly Duffy, the head of Notre Dame Alumni Association, who's here on this call. And Dolly, can you come on and say a couple words to the alumni who are on this panel? Hi, Dolly.
What I would, hey, hello, everyone. What I would say is, wow. Mo, Mia, Betsy, your stories are so unique and so different from each other, but all carry a huge punch about how we should think about going forward and what we do. And you make the Notre Dame women really incredibly proud. Not proud just because of your accomplishments, but because of your decision-making, because of your process, because of all of the things that go into it. So thanks. And thanks, ND Women Connect. This is great. The incredible moderators, incredible organization around it, as always is the case when I jump on any ND Women Connect call. And I just want to say thanks. Thanks for representing Notre Dame so well, and thanks for all you do.
Thank you so much, Dolly, for being here, and thank you for those kind words.
Yes, thank you, Dolly. We're hoping to do another panel coming up sometime later in the year to address some of the questions that we weren't focused on tonight. Some of the topics like returning to work, or perhaps heading into retirement. So life is full of transitions. So we always have topics for panels to share and talk about.
And one last note, I did want to let everyone know that was on the call tonight, we will be sending an email out, and the panelists have agreed to share their email addresses. So if you have further questions, or if you wanted to reach out directly to one of them, the information will be sent to you, so you can do that. So I think with that, we can say thank you all for being here, and hope you all have a wonderful night, and go Irish.
Go Irish. Good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sheila. Thanks, Maureen.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Karen.
Thanks.